What's up, gang? Thanks for joining Bang Bang, the show about war movies with an anti-imperialist twist. I'm Van Jackson.
And I'm Lyle.
And with us...
I'm Rowan Wernham.
Whoops.
And there we sorry. Go. I'm introducing myself today, apparently.
I'm realizing this is as much my problem as it...
I think this is the hardest part of podcasting is the intro.
I'm your new co-host, Rowan Wernham. I'll be here. I'll be here from now on, whether you like it or not.
Yeah. So Rowan Wernham, he lives in New York, and he's originally from New Zealand, where I'm sitting now. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And the film we're going to talk about today is his film. So you're I forgot, I didn't look up the exact credits, but you're co-director and co-writer with Yasha Levine.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we kind of like co-made it. It's just a film by Yasha Levine and Rowan Wernham, based on Yasha's reporting, and I kind of held the camera and, well, I don't know, all the other things.
See, the other thing about Kiwis is that like they're acculturated to not taking credit. So the film is called...
film. It was more like embarrassing. Like if I put all the things I did on there, it just looks stupid. It's like you don't really want it to be like graphics by, like cinematography by, like you start to look amateurish when you've got your name in the credits 9 times.
Yeah. No, I get that. So this film is called Pistachio Wars. There's no actual war in it per se, except the only kind of war we endorse on this show, which is class war. Although there is a foreign policy angle that we'll get to. So I met Rowan, for everybody who's watching. I met Rowan last year at a film festival, the Dock Edge Film Festival in New Zealand, and it's a long story why I was there, but it just happened that we met. He told me about his doc. It sounded amazing. So then he sent me the link. I watched it. It was amazing. But it was all like pre-release because you were doing like the film festival circuit. Is it? And so you were waiting to...
pretty much. Yeah. You got to kind of like spend almost a year running around the film festivals, and then you think about releasing it to a wider audience.
So what triggered, well, I'm teeing you up here, but what triggered you guys to release it now?
Yeah, I mean, we were sort of still a couple of months left in the festival run, and of course, the film is about California water politics and a certain billionaire couple that run the pistachio industry there, that own the wonderful company Stuart and Linda Resnick. And with these fires in LA, there was sort of one of these weird, like mob conclusions where people blamed them for the fires. It was this thing like people saw an article about the fire hydrants running out of water, and then they're like, oh, the reason LA doesn't have any water to fight the fires must be because these billionaires own the water. And we're kind of like, well, that's not exactly true, but I mean, if they've gotten away with a lot of things they should be blamed for, so if they're going to be blamed for the wrong thing now, we'll kind of like, we're not going to say no. But there was just a huge flash of interest in them.
They're cosmically responsible, even if they're not letter of the law responsible for the fires.
Yeah, well, I mean, Yasha's got an argument about how in the bigger picture, because all of the development, the suburban development in the sort of water system, which is run sort of both by the corporate agriculture world and the real estate developers, the whole paradigm of overdevelopment and for-profit development that drives Los Angeles, to build suburbs in fire-prone areas and things like that. I think you could say in a big picture they're responsible, but unfortunately, that they didn't take the water from the fire hydrants in this case.
I mean, but they did play a major role in privatizing the water in California, particularly in Central Valley, which so much of your movie's about. And not only did they didn't like privatize like a small portion of the water in Central Valley or California. They privatized like more of it than all the other cities.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. It's like there's, people are suddenly like, oh, they did this, but it's like, wow, they're also like realizing that these people own enough water to supply Los Angeles, for a year. This is one agriculture company, and they're probably the biggest player in lobbying for like new developments, this big water system, that's kind of sucking the state dry. Things like the San Francisco Bay, the sort of the river system that feeds that's on the verge of complete death, and they're about to put the last pin in that. And they lobbied in the 90s to sort of change the regulations in California. So there's something called the Monterey Agreements that it brought a new level of financialization into water. It was kind of like people like Enron, were starting to get their eyes on California's water and how they could financialize it and revolutionize it in the way that we all know Enron successfully revolutionized electricity.
I was gonna say I didn't realize how evil Enron was until like at the time when they collapsed or whatever. And then I read Arundhati Roy's had a book that just came out, and it's like 20 years of interviews with her. And going back to like 2002, she was railing about what Enron was doing in India, driving this record level of farmer suicides because they had to go into debt in order to either keep farming, like the farming whatever the actual crops that would yield would allow, or they would be driven from their land because of damming that the state would do for privatization, and all of it was being financed by Enron. And so it's like
Enron, yeah.
in multiple pathways, Enron was like destroying India's kind of like proletariat working class, and were like in the masses in the hinterland or whatever. But yeah, I didn't know any of that shit when it was going down. I was like,
yeah. I mean, there's a good documentary, The Smartest Guys in the Room. I think it's an Alex Gibney documentary. Doesn't really go into the India stuff, but I mean, yeah, they were basically fabricating power cuts in California. So they had guys in the grid that could make it go down to spike the price of electricity, like just really nutty stuff. And, they would buy companies. And then, of course, they were so financialized that in the end, they completely collapsed and took pension funds, of like, linesman maintenance people, into oblivion with them. Yeah. Anyway, so these same people were interested in controlling the water that we drink. And the Resnicks passed these things called the Monterey Agreements, which to some degree shifted the balance, around like how water is managed in California. So instead of it being always about residential use first, it was like basically put commercial and residential use into balance. They introduced like ways to like trade water, like this concept of paper water. So you could take water rights to water that would never be delivered through the system and sell it to a suburban development. So, California has this crazy system where all their rivers are dammed up and the dams get diverted into these concrete canals, the biggest system of aqueducts in the world that run around the state. There's kind of like a overall idea of the amount of water that should be in the system, which is based on a very optimistic projection for the rain of the year. So there's basically water rights to about twice as much water as there is in reality. So that means you can have these water rights to water that never materializes. Anyway, this is one thing about making a film about water in California. It can get very technical. So just stop me if I'm going down a very boring
the
hole.
political economy of water is like something you have to have some understanding of in order to like even get to the story here.
Yeah, I mean, I thought like there were two things that I thought your movie did incredibly well. One of them was really get into the weeds. I mean, it's a very complicated story, or it's multiple different stories that in one way relate to each other. And I really want to like give you the opportunity to kind of like run through at least like the major points of the history or histories, because it is, I think the details are fascinating. And I think it is fascinating how they all kind of do come together in the end. The other thing is, I mean, it almost like the names for everything, like the fact that they're called the Wonderful Company, and
Pretty fresh.
the fact that one of the Lady Resnick, I'm forgetting her first name. I just think of her as Lady Resnick.
Linda Resnick.
Yeah, Linda.
Lady is better.
She's the daughter of the director or screenwriter,
the producer, the producer,
yeah. And like, it has this like parable quality to it. Like, is
Yeah,
this
it's like a
real? I
lot of
mean, is
things
this
in this country right now. Like, it's like, is this for real? You know, is there really a burning Cybertruck outside the Trump Hotel on New Year's Day? You know, it's just like
right? It's like
everything's
the
on the
al
nose now. Yeah.
yeah, the algorithm's malfunctioning. I mean, just across the board. But definitely when watching this movie, that's kind of how I experienced it. I mean, also like how they just set up these, and again, I'll hand it over to you in a second. But this Potemkin village, basically, like
Oh, the
Yeah, it's
company town.
in in Lost Hills, which is also so parabolistic, but
Lost Hills. Yeah.
this facade of like a beautiful like park and town and everyone, and they're and they're doing philanthropy out of their kind hearts to build this town, and it just
Yeah.
turns out it's a total wasteland. I mean, literally the soil there and the structures and everyone's water, it's all being destroyed, ruined because the water is unsafe. I mean, it's just quite a
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so much to say. I mean, it's like, you know, we're big fans of Verhoeven, you know, and when Verhoeven kind of is one of those directors that takes America and takes the obvious things and presents them in ways that are just twisted enough that they seem insane and unreal. And, you know, we've got things in this movie that are like that, you know, which is like a lot of the appearances of Linda, you know, online talking about philanthropy, but, you know, bizarre videos that the oil companies have made, you know, like we're like, people don't believe us when we say that, like, oh, they're dumping oil waste into the irrigation for farming in California, you know, and they just think, wow, surely that's not quite right, you know. But then the oil company themselves have made a promotional video about it, how they're like recycling, you know, the oil waste into the water, and it's got this hokey music on it, and like a farmer saying, "We can feed the world if you only," you know, it's like,
Yeah.
it's just like, it's fucking, you can't make this shit up, you know. It's so good when it's real, but it's so bad when it's real, I guess.
That's
And
the
then
wild thing. Like, there's a lot of telling on themselves in the billionaire ag industry in California and what they're doing with water and stuff. And it's kind of like the Trump administration too. Like, there's a lot of like they feel the need to put out self-justifying rhetoric. Either that or they think that they're doing good. I mean, but either
I
way, it's
think
like
they actually believe it. I think they believe it. Like the Resnicks, you know, I've probably watched more of Linda's talking, you know, than anyone. Maybe, I don't know. I'd like to think I have, because I transcribed everything I found online before the, you know, era of AI transcription. And the conclusion I have is that she's a person who does believe her own bullshit, or is at least like capable of convincing herself of her own bullshit. You know, they are just kind of capitalistic people, and, you know, the entrepreneurial people, and, you know, they've suddenly had this light bulb moment where they're like, wow, but we need to give back a little bit, you know. So they see it as being, you know, like, and it's possibly even true, like compared to some other employers out there, they might be marginally better, you know. There might be some perks, you know, to working for the wonderful company. They're kind of weird perks, you know, because you're going to get some like Los Angeles fad diet food in your company cafeteria, you know. But, um, at the same time, like, of course, the whole relationship of the company to the valley is completely extractive, you know. Like, they're obviously extracting the water. You know, most of their crops are on oil company land with no aquifers, you know. So they're dependent on the water that comes in from the canals that, you know, basically completely degrades things like the San Francisco Bay Delta. um you know, of course, like labor, you know, when you have a town like Lost Hills, I don't think the company's paying any taxes, you know, in that area. You know, all of the money is in Beverly Hills. So then they turn up and they're like, oh, this town's got no street lights, it's got no infrastructure, you know, because there's no tax base there. I don't even know if it's an incorporated town, you know. It wasn't formally
are they
incorporated.
unionized? Are they part of UFW or anything?
Well, I mean, there's obviously been people working to unionize out there. And I think they successfully, during COVID, they managed to get, like, I think, like, you know, enough cards or whatever, you know. They kind of like were on the verge of having the company's workers unionize. And then the company has actually mobilized massively a lobbying effort to overturn a law that would, or to change the law. They're saying that, firstly, that they use like free vaccinations to trick people into signing the union cards. And I think they found a few
What?
people that would back that story up. but they're gonna like, like in the same way that Uber and Lyft kind of managed to like change the like labor regulations, they're also like now changing the labor regulations to make it harder for farm workers to unionize. So these are a wonderful company that really care about their workers.
They're doing well by doing good.
They are.
As the husband, Mr. I also don't know. How do I forget their first names? They're like their names are repeated throughout. Stuart
Lord
Resnick,
Resnick.
right?
That's
But
yeah, I mean, but they all no, I do think all these people, they really do convince themselves they're doing well by doing good. I mean,
and if you're a billionaire, you're
mantra.
surrounded by people that are kissing your ass constantly. Like you're that's a luxury, or whatever. You're afforded that because you're a big deal and you've got money and all the connections. So if someone doesn't make you feel good, I'll see you later. And we kind of encountered this too. Like they actually give a lot of interviews. I mean, we never even got anything. There's so much as a response, from anyone, a PR person at the company, trying to get an interview with them. But they do give a lot of interviews, but of course they're very carefully vetted for people that are going to be like, how wonderful is your philanthropy? You just tell me, is it really wonderful or amazingly wonderful? That kind of thing. Yeah.
Right. I mean, once you reach a certain level of wealth and power, your entire life gets curated in a way that you just never need to face any criticism or any sense of guilt or shame or even self-reflection.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, they very early on, like the thing that prompted the Lost Hills money, dump was they did get a critical article in some, publication about the, Lost Hills really was a barren village at that point. So, they did, of course they decided, they were already getting into philanthropy. I think, when you're wealthy as well, like you get to a certain point where you have everything you want materially speaking, but what you start to want is like social currency. It's why the Koch brothers start sponsoring art galleries and things like that. So they're just thinking about that, and they start, they obviously want to have something to say when they go to the Aspen Institute and so on. So to some level, the criticism, it might have had some effect, but they've had a lot of negative media now, and I think they might be at the stage where they just kind of like, they don't care. I mean, we haven't had a response based on the movie yet. We've probably been trying our best to provoke a response.
So I was going to ask that. So like they haven't harassed you or anything like that so far?
We kind of assume that they think that like if they do try and sue us to take the movie down, that'll like be like adding air to the fire or something and just give the movie more chance of getting traction. It's been to date like a pretty small indie movie. We've done some festivals. We've just put it out on Gather, which is kind of like a indie streaming platform where you can go like direct to audience with. But I mean, we can see already there's a lot of public relations articles about the fire blaming. Like they clearly mobilized the public relations to, discredit that or fact check that, through a famously free press. But they haven't directly addressed the movie or acknowledged it at this stage. Yeah.
The fires are it's so like poetic, the way that people like at large are blaming them for the fires and the severity of the fires. And it is kind of their own making though, in the sense that like the Resnicks put themselves out into the spotlight as the avatars of basically like Southern California water and agriculture. And so like if fire's happening in that region, of course you're going to go after the avatars. You know what I mean? Like they're the corporeal form of the evil. And so even though like they didn't go set the fires, or it wasn't like a water shortage that caused the fires or whatever, like their haughtiness or this scheme that allows them to be billionaires in the first place is like makes them targets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was kind of videos that had already come out. Like More Perfect Union did a video about how much water they controlled, and
did they?
There was some various existing media that was, I think, partly some of it they've even credited Yasha's journalism. He was one of the people that wrote early on. So I think it was a lot of the people that were like post fires. They were also saying, look at these people that own all the water. So it was kind of like one of these things where people were sort of like partly blaming them, but also just talking about this is fucked up. Suddenly realizing these people own a lot of water, through their agriculture business, and realizing who they are, because they have a bit of a profile, but they're still like maybe more under the radar than a lot of billionaires. I had an interesting experience recently because I've been making this movie for a long time, so I talk to people about it and the people in it, and my girlfriend's family. I know I've told them all about the movie, and I don't know, something must have gotten to them, through whatever media they're consuming, and they were just ranting to me about the rednecks, and it's like we were explaining, oh, I've actually made a movie about them. I can tell you a thing or two, but it's quite an odd experience, just out of the blue. People that maybe across the board haven't been super engaged suddenly knew who they were. And I think even the public relations they're doing to like counter the fires rumor, in a way, it's still they still can't. It still mentions how much water they control. So that narrative is just growing, and how many people, receive it.
How are they defending themselves? I mean, what does their PR campaign look like right now?
It's obviously just like debunking the idea that they were responsible for the fire hydrants, or the lack of water in the fighting. And they've also made a donation. They made a $10 million donation to, I don't know, some charity. And I mean, there's a sort of another small element to it where I think they're alleging that some of the attacks are anti-Semitic. So I don't know. I haven't seen it actually specified like what the nature of the anti-Semitic attacks are. Like, I mean, I would say that I've like scrolled through some of these threads, and there's definitely people that are coming in and making some anti-Semitic comments, as things do when they reach millions of people on the internet. Or maybe it's about like their control. I don't know. Maybe it's a more broader thing. So, there's a little bit of that, that they're being attacked for being Jewish. And obviously just also the fact checking element, which is, it was reasonably easy to look up early on, like why the fire hydrants ran out of water, in the Palisades. Like, I don't think it's that controversial. It's just like a local water system that isn't really up to the task of like running enough fire hoses to put out the entire city being on fire. It's like it's not because all the water's in the Central Valley, unfortunately, in this case.
So you started explaining like political economy of water stuff at the beginning. Just to be clear, or like, so I'm understanding it correctly, in Southern California, if you're trying to build a new development, which is something that developers are like always doing in Southern California, you have to, there's not a sufficient supply of water locally to support those developments. And so in order to do that, they have to also seek out some sort of private brokerage contract from the north, or like, how's that?
Yeah, I mean, so the origin for this whole story, is Yasha Levine's reporting, and he was living in Victorville, which is kind of like, one of these weird suburbs in the desert in the outskirts of Los Angeles, or, an hour or two from Los Angeles.
Suburban sprawl or something.
Yeah, exurban. I think it's called exurbs. Yeah, because it's not even suburban. It's like, suburban. But so yeah, it's the middle of the desert. There's really no water there, very little, not enough to supply a city. So some of the different paradigms that can work, like the developers will first need to show that they have enough water rights to supply the development. And this is where something like paper water might come in, because one of these water owners, there's a water bank called the Kern Water Bank in the middle of the Central Valley, that's basically majority controlled by the wonderful company, or like a water agency that they control, and some other like large farmers like the Boswell, Vidovich, other big players. So they might like buy a paper water right, to get their permits. But then, of course, the suburb gets developed, and they realize that paper water doesn't even exist. The city's, supposed water, I don't know, it's basically a financial instrument. But then they go to the private market again, and they buy water at even more exorbitant rates, and pass it on to the ratepayers. So I think that was basically what happened in Victorville. They then had to go back to the this water bank in Kern County, and the Vidovich family the Resnicks and so on, buying water, because I mean, I don't know how much weeds you want to get into, but like water is usually sold at like an acre foot kind of, that's the measure. So 1 acre a foot deep. When you're talking about residential water, it's common for residential people to pay around $2,000 for an acre foot, whereas farmers, it's like usually it can be as under $100. It'll fluctuate. At the peak of the drought, it might have gone up to around $1,000. At the worst case scenario, but usually it's in sort of 100, 200, 300. So it's like almost an order of magnitude less than a residential water user will pay for it. Obviously the agricultural water is a little bit less treated. It might just come straight out of a like a dam, without being filtered or purified or anything. But if you're a farmer and you've got access to some surplus water you can sell, you can make a lot of money.
You're taught not, this is not against you, but like what everything you're saying is like the commodification of something that we actually need to survive. And last time I checked, there's no substitute. Like you got to have water or you die. Like, and so what the fuck? How does this situation come about?
Yeah, I mean, because it is one of these weird things because it's not supposed to have come about. I'm pretty sure if you look at the state constitution in California, it explicitly states that water is a public resource. On paper, water is not privatized in California, but then it's I don't know, it's like basically fake privatized. So if you're an a large agricultural corporation, everything's fragmented. So when you get into the Central Valley, you've got all these water districts that basically, however the water allocation works down there, based on rivers, historic rights to rivers. It's, an insane, like 200 years probably of bickering, layer and layer of who owns this water. But the water rights for different regions then get like divvied up by water districts, but the water districts are essentially controlled based on how much land you own. So when you have a company like the Wonderful Company that essentially just owns an entire Manhattan-sized block, of the west part of the Central Valley, they have complete majority control over those water districts. So it's a public agency controlled by private interests. That's one thing. I mean, of course, they've also like the sort of vogue of like market economies, being, basically the ideology of America, especially, through the 90s, and everything was being privatized. So like the idea that like you would marketize something to like make it be distributed more efficiently, so once you've got it, the public resources divided according to the system of water rights, you can then resell it on the market basically to allocate it more efficiently.
Yeah, that's fucked. There was, I can't remember if it was the Lost Hills town specifically, the company town for Wonderful, but, or if it was like another town, but you guys, for a large chunk of the film were showing the almost like depraved circumstances that people were having to live in one of these dust bowl type towns because they like the water was toxic and they couldn't get access to clean water, and so like they could literally only even have water by getting like crates of bottled water and shit like that, and like kids are having to grow up in this environment. Was that Lost Hills?
Yeah, I mean, there was 2 small town water stories. So Lost Hills, the issue there was that basically the farms use the aquifer water, the aqueduct water, which is kind of relatively clean, but the town uses pumps out of the local aquifer, so underground water, groundwater, and that water, because of it is pumped very heavily for agriculture, naturally occurring things like arsenic will concentrate in it. So this is a problem all over the Central Valley. Actually, there's like arsenic, various naturally occurring toxins that are concentrated there. And then, even though the town has benevolent corporate sponsors, they have a very cheap water system that treats the, unsafe levels of arsenic by dumping chemicals in it. So and then it's a little bit like Flint, where these chemicals react with certain pipes and maybe start like doing other unexpected things like corroding your pipes, you know, residue building up in any appliance that has a lot of water, kids getting skin rashes. So, and obviously the water doesn't taste very good. So
That was a really shocking moment of the movie where you have one of the locals like showing you around his home, and just like wherever the water touches, it just ends up corroding. So yeah,
yeah,
the
the taps are
pipes,
like
any of the
melting
appliance,
from the
yeah,
inside. Yeah,
yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So people don't drink it, they're buying bottled water, and
yeah,
these are people that aren't high income to begin with. And then,
yeah,
we went to this town, Porterville, which
Mm.
was kind of like a poster child during the drought, in 2015, 2016, because they actually had their wells run out for a section of the town. So, about 1,000 people, their running water stopped. And this was just like generally portrayed in the media as a natural disaster. It's like, oh, there's no water falling out of the sky, so the taps have run dry.
right,
Droughts are always man-made. That's the thing, yeah.
Always man-made. And we spent a bit of time there, and we got kind of like slightly weird paranoid local people kind of coming up to us and saying things about there being like a local business that was maybe responsible for the wells going dry. And we chased that story, and we found this weird like local water baron. So he'd put a dam on the river, and this river that should have been recharging the wells was kind of being pumped heavily for both an agriculture corporation and a quarry, like a cement work. And of course, this guy was like kind of charming, and he tried to
yeah,
bullshit us, and he told us it didn't exist, and then slandered the people that had been blowing the whistle on him. But even reporting on that, it was kind of like it gives you an insight into how hard it is for anybody outside the system to really challenge it, because that local water agency wasn't going to talk to us. Like, we just call a phone line for it, and they don't pick it up. You need maybe a lawyer. I mean, it might not even have been illegal that the guy was taking the water, because he had like riparian rights. He was further up the river, and it's not even clear how much or little you can take out if you're taking it out for a beneficial use on your land. So you'd have to go to the courts to say that this guy was taking too much water. But that was, we tried to use that as a case of how it can look with water privatization, where it's kind of like a rug pull, like, I think people imagine one extreme, which is like the people of Los Angeles, the water is no longer free. And if you don't have $1, you can't get your water, and you die within 48 hours, so it's scary, but there's a much more gradual version of that, which is like, there's private companies that have a large interest in the water supply. And then when there's a shortage, they're like, oh, we own this water, and you don't have any water, I guess. That's a shame. And people only then realize that maybe they're not going to get it.
That's what's fucked up is the structural
Yeah.
violence. The structural violence they've created a kind of sacrifice zone, but without acknowledging it. Like a place that has to go without, and that's more exposed to actual like physical harm. And it's a function of like their bad luck of being poor, and then therefore having no choice but to live in this kind of area. My mom grew up in kind of like Death Valley, Central Valley, or whatever in Southern California, and it was in one of these shit kicker towns. And she, like, her whole life basically has had various health problems that we don't know, but like almost certainly it's from growing up with the fucking lead pipe problems and the rust and the toxic shit, Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's just like so many things on top of, out there. There's so many problems on top of everything. I mean, firstly, it's just an inhospitable environment. It's been destroyed, like this natural, what once was a lush natural place has just been bulldozed for farms, and the water is gone. The life is gone. It stinks. It's covered in, roads and, oil, whatever, obviously the water. I mean, the people there, they're very poor. It is very easy to not give them things. Of course, there's also a lot of like farm workers, and some of them might not be, have their paperwork or whatever. So, and that's, they're not going to speak up, like that's another reason why these corporations love to have, labor from Mexico or whatever, because if you don't have your immigration paperwork, you're not going to go and cause a stir about your water being fucked up, or you're not going to join the union. So, yeah.
Oh, and so part of the reason we're talking about water, I don't know if this connection has been made clear to the audience, but like pistachios are this water intensive crop that is the Resnicks, I guess, don't have a monopoly of it, but they have like the majority share of production in California or in the world or something. And so,
well, the pistachios, they actually, they have they do have a majority share in America. They're, that's kind of why we focus on pistachios. I mean, there's sort of similar issues around almonds and some of the other nut crops and other orchards out there, but there's something unique about pistachios that we kind of go through in the movie. Firstly, America didn't really used to eat them or grow them very heavily. So without like segueing into the geopolitical side of this, the industry kind of
need
came
to get
about.
to that though, but yeah,
we're gonna get to it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
About out of like sanctions against Iran. So Iran, being the big pistachio producer of the world, were blocked. So America grew an industry, from one that was very small, out of that opportunity. And the Resnicks also, basically, with a huge marketing budget, they created the market. So they spent millions of dollars on Super Bowl commercials with Stephen Colbert in them, and the guy that does Gangnam Style. Basically every meme that was big, like the Craxercise and Prancercise lady, they were doing commercials, and they did a huge retail distribution. So everywhere you go, every bodega, every supermarket, there's a big stand of pistachios. So they created the market. And I think they process, you hear different numbers, but it's between like 2/3 and 4/5 of all American pistachios, or all the pistachios sold in America. And so, yeah.
Well, so who, like the Resnicks have that share of that crop? How do they become pistachio monarchs? Like who the fuck are they?
Yeah. Well, you guys should go to pistachiowars.com and stream this movie called Pistachio Wars.
It's
we tell
available
the
for
whole
streaming
story.
at pistachiowars.com. I should have
Yeah.
said that at the beginning.
There's even
Pistachiowars.com.
like nice pictures and everything. But yeah, they're weird characters. Like they're not who you think of when you're like, who are the biggest farmers in California? They live in Beverly Hills. Linda is a child of Hollywood. Her dad was a movie producer. He produced a movie called The Blob. Oh, someone's posting Pistachio Wars.
Yeah,
in the
thanks
chat.
for putting that in the chat, man.
Yeah, you got it. So she kind of had this Hollywood background, and this kind of crazy story where she hung out around the people that photocopied the Pentagon Papers. She helped Daniel Ellsberg and David Russo.
That's a crazy
expose
connection.
The Vietnam War. Yeah, because she had a marketing agency, so they used her photocopier to copy the papers, that was sent to the Washington Post and whatever, sent around, and she got indicted for it. But she also kind of at the same time was sort of saying that she was never especially political. She was just around those people, and she was interested in marketing. And so she met Stewart. Yeah. She likes to tell the story when she's on stage, because it's gratifying. But
she can say she was like involved in some radical shit. Even
she
though
stopped the Vietnam War, so she's got one in the bank. So if she starts the war in Iran, it's like we're even, it's always good to have one up your sleeve. But yeah, so Stewart, he like kind of has like humble beginnings, or at least according to his story, his dad was, I don't know, like kind of a New Jersey bar rat, a immigrant from Ukraine or something, I think Ukrainian immigrant. And allegedly like somewhat mob adjacent. And then Stewart came to California to get away from his difficult childhood, and started a janitorial business while I was in college that just like was very successful. Somehow his washing windows and college business was like a $10 million business, when he sold it. And then he started a security company doing like alarms, and they were also running basically security at the TSA, the equivalent of the TSA at Los Angeles airport. At one point his guards got busted smuggling like giant blocks of uncut heroin through the TSA, and they got investigated, and the FBI said it was a mob connected company. So you've got this guy who's like maybe like mob adjacent, and made his money through these businesses that really took off. And he meets Linda, who's this kind of like, I guess like high energy marketing person, and they get together and go into business. But no farming background whatsoever. When they first started buying up companies, they bought the Franklin Mint and Teleflora, so these kind of trinket companies, and just sort of came up with clever ways to market those things, like little gimmicks. But yeah,
so they're sitting on slack capital from like janitorial or whatever company that may or may not be connected to the mob, and then they're looking for places to like plow this extra capital.
Yeah, basically it's the 70s, and there's inflation happening. So the story goes is that they basically bought land as a hedge against inflation, and they also bought up a company, Paramount Farms, which is mostly like nuts, almonds, pistachios. I think they had some citrus and pomegranates, and but it was only a short period of time before Linda's like, hey, we can market some of these things. So they created the Palm Wonderful juice. That was their first one.
Oh, the pomegranate juice, yeah.
Pomegranate juice. And then they're like, hey, if we just take a whole pile of boring food and give it like a brand name and spend $20 million marketing it, that's a formula that works. So they did that with pistachios, and
it seems like Linda, I think you guys say this in the beginning of the film, but like she's a marketer at heart. I mean, you have like a clip from her early on where she's marketing herself, which she does throughout the movie, as like a progressive or like a kind of lefty person. Yeah. Her origin story is that she somehow had something to do with Daniel Ellsberg's release of the Pentagon Papers. And she tells this story over and over again. And this marriage between her and Stewart was like a marriage made in heaven, because he at least the way the movie portrays it, he's kind of portrayed as like the closed door mobster behind the scenes, and she's like the in front of the cameras person who is always just saying exactly what you need to say to sell whatever they're selling. And what's also remarkable about their like rise is like Pistachio Monarchs is like, it's usually like a vulgar reading of advertising to think, oh, you just put a lot of money into something and then everyone buys it. But that vulgar theory applies to this case. I mean, it's
what happened, literally.
Yeah, this is what Linda did. I mean, she used her connections with Hollywood, and before they had pistachios, that they had this pomegranate juice or whatever that was, and other things, or was it just pomegranates? I forget, but it was something having to do with pomegranates. And yeah, she was just like using her connections in Hollywood, and then just using her like telegenic, marketing savvy to just push these products on people, and actually did like played the role of like this just very vulgar theory of like capitalist advertising.
Yeah, I mean, they're also good at advertising. I mean, you've got to give them some credit. Like the ads are wacky, and they get your attention.
Totally. Yeah.
It reminded me so much of the Obama years to watch it, like to bring back those commercials, because that was like peak, the Gangnam Style and the Stephen Colbert ads. I remember those, but I of course consume them like everybody else with absolutely no context other than that pistachios taste good,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think like, the Resnicks are a great, for people that want to like start thinking about like the difference between being left and liberal or whatever, because they're liberals, but they're still, whatever, capitalists. And so they can have the right social politics and say the right things about social issues. but still be completely plundering California, to sell a cash crop, and involved in whatever the workings of the American empire. I mean, there's obviously a two-pronged thing there too, because they are like very wealthy, like Jewish people. So I think they're pro-Israel. I think that's their politics. They give a lot of money on that side, into the war machine. But when they, losing my train of thought.
We're gonna talk about you guys visit
when they bash
Palm Springs or
Iran,
whatever.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when they bash Iran, like bashing Iran is sort of like, you can do that from any spectrum in America too. You can bash Iran from the liberal point of view because they have a repressive regime, that treats women badly. So if you want to say we're stealing the Iranian market share, conservatives, supporters of Israel are like, great, we don't like the Middle East, and liberals are like, we also don't like Iran because they're so regressive or something, I'm not sure. Yeah.
So you guys had a scene where I think it was Palm Springs, but you guys went to some banal conference.
Yeah.
This is the good shit, and really overlaps with both of the podcasts that we're crossing over here. What the foreign policy angle, the Iran angle, what is all this about?
So I kind of talked about it before, but I mean, basically, Iran is the world's biggest exporter of pistachio. So if someone says we're going to get a copyright strike from Yasha Levine, Yasha Levine is the co-director of this movie. So
I think he's fucking
yeah.
with us. He's a fan of this.
Yeah.
Show.
I think they're just saying we're giving away the best parts of the
I'm
movie.
watching the chat, I'm watching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so Iran's the big pistachio grower of the world, and the American industry basically saw the opportunity when all of the Iranian exports were blocked from the States, in the early 80s, because of the Iranian Revolution, the hostage crisis at the embassy. Everybody in America did not like Iran anymore, and
so that created a false supply constraint of pistachios.
Basically, yeah. I was saying this the other day. It's like the market would work better for pistachios, but it's distorted by the sanctions. Not that I'm a free marketeer, but basically the sanctions have allowed them to keep this very high price point, where pistachios are sold in tiny packs, only as a snack food, not as a commodity, for I don't know, $4 for I don't know what the measurements are because I know the metric system, but for a little pack.
That works.
Yeah. And so basically the pistachio industry is strangely conscious of how dependent they are on maintaining conflict with Iran and maintaining sanctions and maintaining embargoes. So yeah, I kind of rolled into the Palm Springs Pistachio Growers Convention under the pretext that I was making a film about the drought and interested in interviewing people. And I don't know what to expect, but it's basically number 2 on the agenda was the Iran nuclear deal. That was, at the time when Obama was trying to push through
at a pistachio conference.
At a pistachio conference, it's printed, and they've got these 3-page printed books, and on page 2, it's like, what does the Iran nuclear deal mean for me? In terms of the sunsetting of some, tariffs, by the WTO, and of course, in a bigger picture, maybe more normalized relations with Iran, which is what the Obama deal was working towards, would also mean the eventual complete lifting of tariffs. So there was a lobbyist got up on stage and did what was probably partly a sales pitch to these pistachio people as to why they were spending $500,000 a year out of their pistachio convention, what a kitty fund on lobbying. But yeah, he told the whole history of Iran in relation to pistachios, and this very funny, dry way, sort of describes the hostages coming home, and everybody celebrating, but how the price of pistachios went down as a result. And these people, they just, they don't care. Nothing matters. It's very, you've got to love, neoliberal economics. they're very focused, on the numbers.
Well, I mean, but like the hypocrisy or the contradiction is like it's all there, right? I mean, they brag about being like these just kind of textbook capitalist winners, that they played the game and they won. I'm talking about the Resnicks here, but also like so much of their business model relies on anti-competitive policies, namely sanctions against Iran. So I actually thought there was another thing that kind of made the movie pretty effective, because it kind of is a running theme throughout. I mean, the geopolitical aspects were fascinating. Like, I don't know if you guys like deliberately included this other scene, but there was this one regional farmer. I forget exactly who he was, but he's basically been caught dumping the waste, in I don't know if it was around Lost Hills, but like, somewhere he shouldn't be dumping it. And he basically starts talking about Colombia and how, if we're not doing this, it's going to be Colombia that's doing this. And like, he thinks he's talking to like liberals and leftists. So he makes this odd remark where he's like, and you know what the thing about Colombia is, they're homophobes there. They don't like
That's
gays.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a bizarre scene. It's like there's this clean water activist, and she's talking about how the fracking and the oil production has like fucked up the water in the Central Valley. And these people that are basically work for the oil industry, but they're part of also an AstroTurf lobby group. So they turn up and they yell talking points at her. And at one point, this guy kind of, in the way that, like, I guess like marketing and American industry and empire has adopted like liberal, whatever, like paradigms.
Weaponized identity politics. Yeah.
He's
Pink
like,
washing,
if you stop
green
oil
washing.
in California, you're going to have oil in Iran and Venezuela, who are like, communists who, don't respect women and don't allow homosexuality, so California, rainbow oil. Yeah, rainbow oil in California is how it works. Yeah. But these guys are also Republicans. They're clearly Republicans who watch Fox News, and they'd be against those politics on any other context. Yeah.
Right. And then it's the same logic with Iran. I mean, I guess you just mentioned Iran, but like this argument that like, if we stop sanctioning Iran, it will be them that, retakes the pistachio industry. And they don't like women, and, it's the same. It's just, I mean, a lot of the clips that you showed were from the early 2000s, or like the peak of the war on terror, especially when the Resnicks, when you make it clear that there were major funders behind all these neoconservative Iran hawk think tanks. And, liberal feminism was like, that was like the rhetorical name of the game, like for defending, like basically making the case for invading and occupying Afghanistan. And then even to some extent, Iraq. And I mean, that was like, I think for younger people, they might not realize the extent to which these types of talking points were used, not just by liberal hawks, but by conservatives, by the right, even though it's totally disingenuous, not only because this is not why they supported invading and occupying, but also because they themselves were homophobes. They themselves were misogynists. Really good job just like capturing that moment as well, which is still with us, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, the Resnicks, the Pistachio Conference, they're actually smaller. Like the sum total of the rest of the American industry is smaller than the Resnicks. So when we go to the conference, these people are kind of small fry. And we tried to get at like what the Resnicks are doing around the Iran pistachio lobbying. But of course, it's a very opaque world, and I actually kind of want to pull a trick and maybe interview Van at least, about think tank world a little bit, because we didn't have any way to crack it. We can get publicly available documents, so we can see who they're donating money to. These organizations publish who's on the board. But so, I mean, the Resnicks, I guess, on a base level, they were giving a lot of donations to politicians across the board, including politicians who are hawkish on Iran, Republicans, and so on. They were giving money into all of these kind of like pro-Israel organizations that, obviously very anti-Iran, as well as being pro-Israel. you know, I mean, they give to the friends of the IDF, you know, some of them, they're not even giving it to like wishy-washy ones. But yeah, they're also on the board of a couple of think tanks. So, you know, the big one is WINEP, the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Yeah, which is like an APAC spinoff, basically. So, you know, APAC is like, well, we can't just publish papers, you know, about how we need to kill Iran to save America, you know, because everyone knows what APAC stands for. So we'll, like, you know,
you got a policy wash
an office down the hallway, you know, like in the same building, but, you know, we'll have another group called Washington Institute for Near East Policy that's funded by us that produces these papers, you know, but it's quite a big one, and everybody seemed to go through there. And the Resnicks were sort of on the board of that for about 10 years over the space of, you know, on and off for 15 years. So, you know, I mean, this is what I wanted to ask you, Van. Like, what does it mean to be on the board of a think tank like WINEP? You know, like, are they turning up for wine and cheese? Are they getting briefed? I mean,
So that was the thing. You guys kind of almost ended on that, like this uncovering about like, oh, there is a geopolitical dimension here, and it's nefarious as fuck. And then you're like, see you later, and that's the end, you know. And I was like, God damn, there needs to be a sequel to the shit, you know. And like, point taken on the difficulty of cracking the think tank nut, you know, like there's a couple people that are like me, but you have to be pretty alienated from that scene in order to be able to like see the scene with clear eyes, or to be willing to critique it honestly, because you're dependent on it otherwise. And so like getting an insider who's still an insider to sort of explain things is like almost impossible. But like to be on a board, you kind of buy your way onto the board, which it looked like you guys had the financial disclosures or whatever, like they had donated money to these think tanks, especially the Washington Institute. And that's kind of the price. That's the expectation. Like, you put an oligarch on your board, it's because you want their money. And so it's kind of like with the MAGA coalition, you've got the ethno-nationalists like Bannon who are doing the like ideological production, you know, let's come up with the bright ideas that justify why we should do horrific things with policy, right? But then the ideology, that's like superstructure shit. Like, you actually need a material basis to sort of pull that off, especially if your movement, your political movement, is not mass based. So it's like, where are you even fucking coming from? Like, what gets you in the door? Well, it's the money. And that's how you get the Elons and like the billionaire class. And that's where the Resnicks fall in. They're in a different industry than like AI or tech or whatever, but it's, you know, like they're the pistachio oligarchs. And so you've got to have that marriage of the billionaires and the reactionaries. And like those two the thing that I thought you guys did brilliantly in this movie, especially with the way you tied it up at the end, was to show that like when you let these billionaires be billionaires, when you let them accumulate and hoard capital, it doesn't just come at the expense of others because of how they're making their money. It comes at the expense of like democracy itself because of what they do once they have their money, which is to try and get more of it, try and tilt the regulatory playing field and politics in their favor. And that necessarily is like always throwing off violence toward others. And
just
go ahead.
Oh, I was just to add another layer to the whole think tank thing. Think tanks became really big in part because they were a reaction against more liberal or left-minded universities. That's how they were seen on the right, and even that's how they were seen among like New Democrats to a large degree in the 90s. And
this is like a Cold War,
mid-80s for that matter, right? That they needed a counter to like the really progressive stuff that was being pushed out of universities, and so the model from the beginning was very much like we need to have like a PR machine for capital and for all the different interests of capital. And it's more or less been that ever since. And of course, the nation states that are very much connected to this or that capitalist interest. So like we hear a lot about how think tanks, you know, this think tank, you know, is basically just Saudi money or UAE money or whatever. And that's true. But like, it's also like also it's pistachio oligarch money, it's tech oligarch money, it's oil and fracking oligarch money, and you can't really separate the nation states from the various interests. But the other thing I just wanted to emphasize is like, and this is kind of like a dark reading, but like now, like they don't even really need the think tank scene anymore because they've captured the university as well. Like what we're seeing now in reaction to Gaza is like now you have the same kinds of people sitting on the board of all the major universities, including like the most elite, most prized universities like Harvard, who are now doing exactly what they've been doing for decades in these think tanks, basically just calling the shots. So now it's at a point where Harvard just pushed out a statement on their website saying that you can no longer criticize, if you criticize Zionism, Zionism. It's not just that Jews are protected. I'm a Jewish person, by the way, and I actually worked at AIPAC back in the day. I've had a major political journey.
He's not on the right anymore. He's
yeah. I could go on and on about this, but I don't want to like butcher it, but it was more or less like it's not just that Jews are a protected group. Like Zionism as an ideology is now in a protected ideology. And if you are oppose Zionism, I forget the exact statement, but it's really shocking. Like if you oppose Zionism, it's just like opposing Judaism. This is something that you would have never seen.
That's the legislation.
Yeah. But like, I guess like it's just like it's even darker than your movie portrays it, because it's not like they just own the think tanks in Washington. Like they now own like the last refuge of like independent thought, which is higher ed.
Because think tanks.
This is the third way. It's everybody is just you've got to make it in capitalism, and that means working for somebody, even if you're an intellectual.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very organic convergence between these interests. Like the Resnicks would not end up on the board of like Center for International Policy or a think tank that's like supporting the Iran nuclear deal, right? Like they know that they are aware of their class interests, and they're not going to undermine that with whom they give money to in the think tank space. But the other thing I was going to say is like the think tanks don't produce for public consumption anymore, really. Like nobody reads what they do. It's a farm team or whatever for people who go serve in government and then actually steer policy, and they do it legally under the mandate of like public education, but that's for their tax status.
That's what I kind of like assumed. It's like the Heritage Foundation basically is writing policy in America now. And, if you want somebody to write you a convincing, I don't know, like set of sanctions against Iran or something, or maybe not that, but, these think tanks will create a policy basically, or they'll create a strategy, for addressing Iranian hostility, or they'll create like the intel, as to why Iran is like, this close to having nuclear weapons, so they'll create the material basically that can feed into the policy apparatus. I mean, I was kind of like, with the Resnicks, I don't know if they donated much money to the WNEP. Like, we couldn't find much, and maybe also their donations aren't as public record as some foundations. I'm not even sure if they're non-public.
They're not required to be public.
Yeah, but AIPAC obviously has money, and then like the Resnicks will be putting money into these more innocuous foundations, like the Jewish Federation, or and these are all interconnected foundations that will basically also take the money from America and like because I don't think there's sort of like some kind of foreign problems. You're not supposed to be donating money to like foreign powers. You've got to do like a domestic wing of it and stuff like that. So they kind of like launder all this money. So yeah, I'm sure they're obviously a part of the money machine, but I mean, I don't even know if they need to like have a say in like what WNIP's doing. They know what they're doing, they know that they're anti-Iran, and they
the constraint though on like the Washington Institute as an example, they build up the street cred that attracts the Resnicks by being Iran hawks, by being Middle East hawks, by being like a kind of like Zionist neocon sort of taking those kinds of policy positions. But then having the Resnicks on the board, knowing what their financial interests are, the ability to pivot to not be an Iran hawk, if circumstances change or become more favorable to peace or something like that. The ability to pivot is next to zero if your board who governs you is stocked with people who are invested in a sort of the status quo or like friction with Iran or war with Iran, you know? And so this is like the way in which think tanks, they capture policy not just because they are the people who literally go in and then make policy in the government, but they're also the people who are like the echo chamber for government policy, like the echo chamber that says, oh, we need to be bombing Iran or we need to be preserving the status quo, which is a horrific status quo. You know, like that you don't see any change come out of them ever, unless it's the change in the form of the opportunity to do a violence that was not feasible before. You know, like now Greenland's in our sights, you know.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
my
well,
understanding is like they're like talking to like oligarchs are talking, you know, very rich people talk to each other about what the, you know, the news of the day. And they might be like, "Oh, did you see this like terrible article that was just written by, you know, a fellow at this or that, you know, think tank? Oh, I thought this think tank was on our side. I thought we're like giving them money." And they're like, "Hey, you know, you should sit on their board." Like I really think like that might sound ridiculous, but I really think that's like a lot of how this stuff works. It's like if they get concerned about a particular issue, if they feel like the politics in some arena is not moving in the direction they want it to, or it's not moving fast enough, you know, then this is just like one of many levers that they can pull, either by just giving more money to that institution or the relevant institutions, or by like actually getting yourself on the board or getting a surrogate on the board.
Yeah, we have a great clip in the film of this guy, Patrick Clausen, who's one of the Winnet people. And he went out in public and basically spitballed ideas about how to get a war with Iran going. You know, it's like, you know, if the, it's like, I think it's like people say it was like he was suggesting a false flag operation, you know, where you take down a submarine or something and then blame Iran for it. You know, so these people are pretty, they're pretty wild. It's pretty, and, you know, the crowd is kind of like nervously laughing at him. You know.
But like they stand to benefit by continuing down that path, you know, like promoting that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's kind of, you know, I mean, like a lot of things with like, you know, like liberal internationalism or whatever, you know, the kind of what's happened in Gaza has broken it. And I do wonder how the Resnicks, it's going to be rocky for them a little bit, you know, because I think the people that believed in the liberal, you know, international order or whatever, you know, of humanitarian interventions and things, like I have seen that fracture, you know, like, you know, they did basically after the Iraq war, there was quite a large amount of opposition. Obviously, there's a lot of people that were captured, even on the left liberal side. You know, but then like the Syria war, it was almost like total capture, you know, and I was in America by then, and, you know, everybody was like, well, Assad is a monster and he has to go, you know, conscientious people, you know, America or Britain are going to go in there and they're going to like save people. But, you know, now it's like, wow, you know, those people, a lot of them are like, wow, no, we just did a genocide. You know, we just armed Israel to, you know, obliterate, you know, a record number of women and children. So they really have, like, I think fractured that consensus, you know, that we're like basically the neoconservatives and the liberals were kind of in agreement about how you project American power, you know, with different rhetoric, you know, but like basically the same outcomes, you know. So the Resnicks world is fracturing a little bit because I don't know if they can still pretend to be like liberal arts donors, you know, in California and be giving to like the IDF, you know, like, or at least there's going to be a faction of their base that's going to be uncomfortable with that.
That's one of the scary things about these Trump years, though, is that like now everybody is, especially post Gaza, willing to be more mask off, and there's less. People are like
Yeah.
happy to embrace their inner hawk, their inner reactionary. It's less sensational than it would have been even like 8 years ago. You know.
Yeah.
There's like a barbarism that's always like simmering beneath like the capitalist status quo. And like one way that you can understand far right or like fascist outbursts is like basically that barbarism that's always lying underneath, like coming to the surface and boiling over. And we're definitely at that moment right now. I mean, everything we've talked about is barbaric. Like the whole story of the Resnicks, the whole story of like the entire legal system that they helped shape to a large degree. It's all barbaric, but it's like an acceptable barbarism. It's a barbarism that we as a public normalize, even though it leads to tremendous death and suffering, all needless. But we're now at a moment where like that barbarism has gotten, like the normal barbarism has gotten so extreme that that like the elites, those in charge, feel like they can do anything. And Gaza was kind of like a mass off moment where like they're always going to push the envelope. They're always going to see how much they can get away with. And I remember having this conversation when the genocide first started, and I was like trying to explain to a friend, like, this isn't just going to have geopolitical implications. This isn't just going to have like electoral implications. This is like a world historical thing that's happening right now, where like if they get away with this, which it seems like they will, like they were going to try to get away with everything.
How can you mobilize on moral grounds to resist anything if you've accepted a genocide? You know, like at that point, Naomi, I keep saying this. Naomi Klein had this line, like, Gaza's blown a hole in our moral universe, and now anything can get through. You know, I think that's right.
Yeah. No, I mean, you know, obviously the hole's already there as far as I was concerned, you know, and a lot of people were concerned, but I think that hole has gotten more visible for a lot of people. But yeah, it is crazy. I mean, it's just watching this sort of Trump era happen. And, you know, I think it's probably partly, you know, also Russia invading Ukraine and sort of winning, you know, and then Israel just, you know, running, you know, completely, you know, roughshod over Palestine. And like you say, possibly going to get away with it, at least in the short term. And, you know, now we've got Trump, you know, like kind of like joking, not joking about taking Greenland or, you know, Canada. You know, it's just like this idea of like, yeah, it is mask off, isn't it? It's just like, instead of like having a reflective moment, it's much more of a like, you know what, fuck it. Yeah, like let's just, American power is fantastic, and we'll now openly protect it. Yeah.
That's this like I think descriptively, you see a lot of people, especially the think tank types, fall into the narrative making of like, it's a turbulent world, global chaos, great power competition, the return of classical geopolitics, the return of imperialism. And they're saying this as if it's like mournful, but we got to put our best foot forward because this is the world as it is, you know? And that's like the justification for being our worst selves or letting our worst selves free, because it's like, hey, security is a scarce commodity in this great power conflict world, you know? But like with that, the farce of that and the rejection that I see your film representing of that is that there are processes and systems and social networks that produced this world. This world of shit did not come out of nowhere. It came precisely out of the convergence and conspiracy of these interests between the wealthy and the reactionary, and one serving the other. They made the world this way. They made neoliberalism. They made all the consequences of neoliberalism, and then they're marrying themselves to ethno-nationalism now that ethno-nationalism is resurgent in response to the conditions that fucking neoliberalism fucking wrought.
Yeah, I know. It's why are these self-reinforcing loops always negative feedback spirals?
The negative
you know,
feedback.
Can't we have a positive feedback spiral for once, where like something good happens and it just keeps spiraling better and better? It's like, no, that's not.
I mean, I hate to say, but the positive feedback only happens after like the bad guys finally get defeated. I mean, that's why the reason we were able to like enjoy like something of like a social democratic, you know, a lot of problems with the post-war social democratic compromise in Europe and the United States. But like the reason we were even able to have that is because the Nazis fucking lost. Like, and all of Europe, not only the Nazis, but like all of Europe was devastated. There was just such a mass scale of humbling that took place and chastening that took place. And, you know, I mean, that's like at my most despairing moments, that's kind of where my thinking goes, is that until these fuckers lose in a really big way, and in some ways like the ruling class needs to lose in a really big way, where it's hard to imagine that happening, but also like the sectors of the public that support these oligarchs, like the Trumpists, or even like the Democratic elites for that matter, like they also need to like feel it. And obviously Americans as a whole are feeling it and have been feeling it for many years. But yeah, there needs to be some real defeat. And what's so terrifying is like how are we gonna how is the US, particularly the ruling class, going to be defeated in the years ahead?
Well,
It's
and
very
you have
hard to see like it's very hard to see like a solution to the stuff coming out of like iteration or the democratic political process. It's like, when you look at California, it is like this sort of epitome of this development, where you've got the water is all being like commoditized into this, man-made system. You've got, massive suburban sprawl, and this is a development ideology, put humans first, that America is spreading through its empire, the Washington consensus all around the world. But then, California is also obviously such a fragile place, and you can see like how badly things can go wrong when you just don't think about these things. The place is on fire at the moment. They're recycling through drought and then crazy rain. So, and then at the same time, like, who is going to go out there and say, well, vote for me? We need to have less. We need to use less stuff. We need to have less oil. We need to eat less pistachios. Like, no one's ever going to win an election on that. And, I think you're right in a way. It's like that. No one can imagine, we're stuck in this funk, like the collapse of the Soviet Union, where no one knew how to end the Soviet Union. Everyone knew it wasn't really working. We're stuck in a funk now with capitalism where we're like, we don't really know a way out. And, the only way we can imagine is some disaster, Hollywood scale disaster, whether it's an ecological catastrophe or a war or something, but obviously that's not that fun either. So, yeah.
Well, Trump, we're on the track, whether we like it or not. I think, like, I see a lot of accelerationist reasoning in what's playing out with Trump 2.0 policies, like everything he's doing, from like immigration crackdowns to the fucking tariffs to the Mexico war, like it's all gonna be, it's like all the source material for like a Great Depression, separate from whether it triggers us into World War III. The thing
and also
what was the thing we're missing compared to the World War II era was there's no labor militancy. Like the working class fought for itself back in the day, and now we're like a fraction of what we used to be.
On that note, go see some Pistachio Wars. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least buy yourself
like,
some of the Resnick's pistachios to make yourself
I'm
feel
trying
better.
to tell people, like, we're not like trying to raise awareness, like, but you can join us and wallow in doom, in this film. And if you just want the movie equivalent of some entertaining doom scrolling, with some beautiful desolation, this is the best way to spend your money right now. Yeah.
It was a great
solidarity and doom. Yeah.
No, the ending. We were talking. I forget if we had already started recording. I don't think we did. The Jacob's Ladder, which we've done an episode on before, and how it's like just one long dark trip. And I have to say, the end of the whole movie was kind of dark trippy, but like the credit scenes, where you had like just like random shots of different like news appearances, mostly from Linda Resnick, like that was like so dark.
It was like RoboCop dark. Like
yes, it was. Actually, when you say that you're inspired by Verhoeven,
Verhoeven, that's right.
Yeah. Like that makes so much more sense because it had this like Verhoeven vibe and aesthetic to it throughout, but especially at the end. Yeah.
It's like we had a bleak ending. We're like, well, Linda's going to come in and cheer you up.
That's
she's going to save us. With her philanthropy. So
honestly, I wanted to like buy like just pounds of like the pistachios and just like gain 30 weights just in like a depressive bout after watching that movie.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I mean, this was like the movie Chinatown meets, Mike Davis's City of Quartz. So everybody, Pistachio Wars, get on it. You
That's
guys got
a very high bar. But thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on, man. Do we do the outro on the lives?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
I
why
can't.
not?
I can't play the music.
Oh, okay. So I
We
don't
have
have
it.
to
We
do
have
the
a
credit.
credit that we have to give to our outro music creator.
Well, we are going to at some point. We're going to have this on the Bang Bang website.
Yes, you're good
So
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Touche.
So credit for the intro and the outro, as always, goes to Dumpster Fire by the Great Heights Band, featuring Raul V.
Thank you guys. Thanks everyone for tuning in. Rowan, come back,
Yeah,
man.
Rowan, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah,
great to
thanks
chat
for
to you
being
guys.
part of
Yeah.
our rambling machine.
It's
Quite a ride.
It's pod world, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bang.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bang bang.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, chat, for joining.